Hello, I am Jay Beach alongside Christopher Zunk. That plus, once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered a roster that is weak and weary, over the many quaint and curious players of forgotten lore, watching their games I nodded, nearly napping, as of someone gently flopping short of the goal line door. "'Tis Cleveland's trash," I muttered, flopping short of the goal line door. Only this and nothing more. Distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December, and each drive dying, punts, fumbles, interceptions wrought upon the turf floor. Vainly this team sought to borrow from the Browns' books surcease of sorrow for the purple curtain of Baltimore. And the Ravens never winning, still sitting on the bench of despair, just above the NFL's basement floor, and their soul from within a demon shadow that lies floating on that floor shall lift the Lombardi trophy nevermore. All that and more as the Lunch Room Syndicate brings you their completely factual, not at all subjective Baltimore Ravens all-time team.
Presented by Edgar Allan Poe. I was not prepared for a poem. All righty. Now that we got that beautiful poem out of the way, and it was special, I did enjoy it. We are doing the Baltimore Ravens all-time team, technically one of the youngest franchises in the NFL currently, second youngest on technicality. They were the original Cleveland Browns. It's a weird situation. Everyone knows their story at this point. But we're going to be picking their team. As usual, we're taking one quarterback, two running backs, three wide receivers, a tight end, and four from any offensive position, including offensive line and kickers.
Yep, that's 11 on the offensive side. We're going to take 11 on the defensive side, too, including two on the defensive line, three linebackers, four defensive backs, and two, similarly from the Alt-O, we have the Alt-D, any position applies. To help us out, we are going to be tiering off every player as we go through. We are going to have a bottom white tier. These are players that are deserving of mention, probably not going to make it. We have our mid tier, which is going to be black. The black tier are really good players that are going to get some serious contention, but there's still a little bit of debate to be had, unlike our purple tier, which are no-brainers. They are all-time Baltimore Ravens.
As usual with the tier list, just because someone's in a purple tier on this team doesn't necessarily mean we think they're an all-time great elsewhere. It's just this is to help us out.
Yeah, the tiers are specific to the Ravens.
Yes. And one of the first things we do with every team we do here in Lunch Room Syndicate is we name a face of the franchise. There's a few options here. It's a weird group.
It is. I think I have it narrowed down to three that are like serious contenders for me. Maybe, no, four. I got it down to four. All four on the defensive side.
Yeah, this is definitely going to be a defensive heavy team in general. I have it down to two. I think I know who maybe your other two are. I think the two in my mind are a little bit more synonymous. We're going to be leaving off the big name, but we're going to talk about him. My two were Ed Reed and Terrell Suggs.
Yeah, those are two of my four. I guess I wanted to put Rod Woodson on there because it's Rod Woodson, but his tenure was just really short. Also, a big fan of Haloti Ngata, and he was my fourth.
Okay. Neither one of those was the guy I thought you were going to go with, but those make sense.
Oh, who were the two that you thought I was going to go with?
I thought just because of their name recognition for Baltimore, but you probably don't know them as well as I do, would be Bart Scott or Peter Boulware, both linebackers as well. That's kind of where I thought maybe we were going, but those make sense as well.
Well, and even with the names that we picked, and I think I can agree with you on the two, like if I narrowed my four down to two, it would be Suggs and Ed Reed.
Honestly, I have my number one.
It's Ed Reed.
It's Ed Reed. Yeah.
Yeah, he was there for what was it, 10 years, 11 years?
11 seasons.
11 seasons, 9-time Pro Bowler, 5-time first team and Hall of Fame. He was an absolute difference maker on the field.
He's one of the top 5 greatest safeties of all time, if not number one. That's a whole different discussion because navigating safeties versus people who have played safety and played corner at the same time, someone like Rod Woodson, who's on this list, or Charles Woodson, ironically enough, who isn't on here. But Ed Reed is one of the top defensive backs of all time, really, but definitely one of the top safeties. And he's one of the first names I think of with the Baltimore Ravens. He's probably the first name I think of. So he's my face of the franchise.
He would be the number 2 name that I think of behind the number 1 that we are not going to be mentioning on here because he's a piece of shit.
Yep, agreed. But now that we got the face of the franchise out of the way, it is time to go through our positions and pick. As always, here with our NFL teams, we go in kind of an order compared to what we do with hockey, and we start with our quarterback position. Jay, who do we have?
We are going to be looking at Joe Flacco, Jamar Laxon, and Jenny Testaverde.
Indeed, we are. It's a group, all right.
There's 3 names there.
There is 3 names here.
We normally go by player. I don't think we need to here. Vinny Testaverde's not going to get this, but he was their first quarterback.
He was their first quarterback, came over from Cleveland.
So seeing that he was their first quarterback and the list is so short, I put him on. He's a bottom tier.
Yeah, he's a bottom tier. And his numbers for those 2 years are very respectable. You know, this was during his respectable period. He sucked in Tampa and then went to Cleveland, started getting better, went then Baltimore, and then he went to the Jets and was really actually pretty good with the Jets. So I mean, he these are respectable numbers, but really this team comes down to Joe Flacco or Lamar Jackson. And the reason why it's a question right now is Lamar Jackson doesn't have a long time in the league yet.
He's 100 games behind Joe Flacco, but he's still my pick.
Yeah, he's probably mine as well. He's an electric player. He's like Michael Vick ramped up by 3. And he's a better Michael Vick, and that's saying a lot. He can throw the ball. His stats suggest he can throw the ball. A lot of people consider he's just a running back. Yes, he runs well, but he can throw the damn ball. He doesn't have a lot of weapons over in Baltimore. Joe Flacco deserves probably more credit than he gets. I think he gets shit on a lot. I think he was not a bad quarterback. He just took a bad they gave him a really huge contract, but he did have one of the greatest postseasons ever. But Lamar Jackson's my guy as well.
Yes. So Joe Flacco is mid-tier, Lamar Jackson top tier, Vinny Testaverde bottom tier, which means Lamar Jackson is our QB. Are we taking any over to the All-O?
I think Joe Flacco deserves to go to the All-O.
Yeah. Stronger team, he probably doesn't make it, but he's not out yet. Next up is the running backs, where we are going to be looking at Justin Forsett, Jamal Lewis, Willis McGahee, Bam Bam Gigolo, and Ray Rice.
Indeed. We have an interesting group of running backs here. Justin Forsett only played for 3 years, but was a pretty productive player for those 3 years. 2,000 yards in 29 games rushing. He had 452 receiving yards, had 10 touchdowns. With this team, that's only 3 years, so it's hard for me to, it's hard to justify, but I think he's a low end mid.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Just his yards per game average is going to be second on this list, which puts him into the area where we need to start considering him. Jamal Lewis had a couple outstanding years and a really solid tenure overall for him. So I'd go a top tier for Lewis.
Yeah, he's a top tier. He had the amazing 2,000-yard season, and what was that, 2001 or 2002?
2002, something like that, yeah.
85 yards per game average with the Ravens is awesome. And Yeah, and he wasn't bad receiving either. He had 160 receptions overall and 1,300 yards. So for being a big back, he can still catch the ball.
Yeah.
Willis McGahee, Baltimore legend Willis McGahee. I don't know if that's true or not. 2007 to 2010, played 4 years there. Doesn't have great stats. Has 31 touchdowns, which is pretty good. I thought he was better there than what's indicated here, but I can't justify anything higher than the bottom.
Yeah, he's a decent name, but I just don't think he has the stats to justify it here in Baltimore. Bam Morris, just 2 years, short tenure, 22 games. But again, that yards per game average is right up there amongst the best in here. Just a big, huge, bruising guy. Like, if I remember his name, he's up there amongst like the biggest backs that I would think of. But the problem is I don't think of him too often, so he's going to be bottom tier here.
Yeah. So yeah, he was fun. He was a fun back while he played, but yeah, he's a bottom tier. Their first major running back, along with Ernest Biner, they shared the backfield in Baltimore for a time. Ernest didn't really do much in Baltimore, and finally, I don't know where to go with this selection. Ray Rice, stats wise, and what I remember him playing is a top tier, but he had some. Well, really only one, but it was a pretty major off the field issue, and I'm struggling.
Yeah, and I mean, normally we see these off the field things, and we give it serious like consideration to where the player's just eliminated. But his big assault, they got married 6 weeks later.
Yeah.
There were no criminal charges pressed against him.
Mm-hmm. It was weird.
So it's still something that sticks out in your mind. So for that, I mean, if we get rid of the name and we look at just the stats, he's a better receiving back than Jamal Lewis. Jamal Lewis was a bit better on the rushing. Overall, I think they're probably pretty even. Mm-hmm. You throw in the name and it's bottom tier, so it probably averages out maybe to a mid tier.
That's kind of where I'm at with it. Is a mid tier. We average 100 yards a game total between rushing and receiving, and that's pretty impressive.
But that does take Jamal Lewis up as our first selection.
Now, for me, I don't know if it was for you. For me, even if the Ray Rice, not with the bullshit, Jamal Lewis would still be my number one.
If we got rid of names, I probably would have gone Ray Rice.
So we would have differed there. But yeah.
So that does put Ray Rice on here yet for me.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at too. I don't think Justin Forsett had a tenure long enough to justify, unfortunately. So that means that our running backs for the Baltimore Ravens are Jamal Lewis and Ray Rice.
Is Forsett going to go over?
He
doesn't have the tenure.
No, I'm leaning towards no. We don't have a lot, but we do have two really good guys over there. So
yeah.
All right. But we're moving on to wide receiver. And here at wide receiver, we have some big names, but not a lot of tenure. We are starting with Derek Alexander, Anquan Bolden. How the fuck that name up? Mark Clayton, and not the one that the old timers know. Quadre Ishmael. Michael Jackson. Derek Mason, Steve Smith Jr., and Torrey Smith.
Derek Alexander, I don't think of him as like a big receiver. Like he's got decent yards. I like his yards per game. It's leading the way. So I think maybe I'm at a mid tier because that's leading the way, his yards per game, but I just don't think of him as big time receiver.
No, I remember him when he came into the league with the Browns. I think 95 was his first year, so maybe 94. Either way, he came towards the tail end of the original Browns. He came in with a ton of hype out of the University of Michigan. He never really lived up to that hype, but he was a solid receiver. Here's a man who should be Hall of Fame bound eventually. Anquan Bolden. Only played 3 years in Baltimore. I thought it was longer, to be honest with you. Won a Super Bowl in Baltimore. Again, the yards per game was down probably to his career average, but it was toward later in his career after his Arizona days, but really solid receiver for them. The name wants me to put him in mid-tier, but I don't know if the stats suggest that.
Well, the name is a top tier.
Yeah, the name's a top tier.
So I think we can safely put him in bottom tier, but I think he's on the outside looking in here. Mark Clayton, we just keep going further and further down on that yards per game. But he was there. He's the second longest tenured wide receiver for them, 12 touchdowns in 76 games. Still no higher than a mid-tier, though.
You're giving them more credit than I would have. I would have put him on the bottom.
Yeah, I have no problem going bottom, but I was just saying he's no higher than a mid-tier.
No, Mark Clayton is the epitome of Baltimore's drafting problems with wide receivers. One of their many first-round wide receivers they've drafted, just never living up to the hype. Not that he was a bad receiver, he wasn't, but he never lived up to that first-round billing. Quadre Ishmael, hey, our yard per game went up. Played 47 games, only had 191 receptions, which is a smallish amount, but was always a big play threat for them in about their only competent wide receiver in that 2000 Super Bowl team. Man, did that offense suck. That defense, though. I struggle placing him as well. I liked him as a receiver, but it's hard for me to go above the bottom.
Yeah, he is the missile to Raghib's rocket.
And he was fast too.
Yeah, I probably agree bottom tier for him. Now we are looking at Michael Jackson. These are the years. This would be right after the History album came out, and he's right there in his fondling era. I don't.
Sorry, I love that picture. It's just,
I know I'm getting stuck on that.
It's just like when I was looking up pictures, I saw that one. I'm like, because I was debating if I was going to do it. If I was going to go with that joke, I said, man, we have to go with the joke. And then I saw that picture. I'm like, oh, yeah.
Yeah. Do you know what Michael Jackson likes more than playing for the Baltimore Ravens, or likes most about playing for the Baltimore Ravens?
Oh, God. Let's be careful with this one.
There's 20 of them.
Oh.
Did I?
22, technically. Okay. You had me really nervous with that one. I'm like, I'm still live on Twitch.
Well, the other joke is pushing it a bit more, but this one just doesn't make sense unless you know the other one.
Exactly. But tell us about Michael Jackson, the wide receiver.
Again, we just have mediocrity throughout here. Like at some point, I'm looking at it going, man, we have to start judging them based on everybody else on this list. He's still a mid-tier.
Mid-tier? Okay. He's on the low end, mid-tier then for me.
He's on the low end of, but I mean, again, when we're looking at Michael Jackson compared to Mark Clayton, he's a step above that.
Well, now we're finally getting to a couple real wide receivers. First, Derek Mason. I hated that motherfucker so much in his playing career. He played for Tennessee and then Baltimore, so he was already behind the 8 ball, but he was a damn good wide receiver. Came to Baltimore with Steve McNair, ironically enough. You know, the stats aren't going to wow us for most teams, but his overall stats really good. He had a couple great seasons. I think 2 1,400-yard seasons in Baltimore. He's a top tier.
The Rock has come back to Baltimore.
All righty then. Oh wait, that was last video.
Yeah. Steve Smith, just another short tenured guy. If this were Carolina, we're talking top tier. I think he falls kind of in line with our arguments here for Anquan Bolden. So I think I'm going to tear him off like we did with Anquan Bolden.
Yeah, I agree. He was more productive in terms of, like, you know, his yards per game was higher. It's almost 70, and that was at his end of his career. So I'm pretty comfortable with a mid-tier. Torrey Smith, another just fast as fuck wide receiver. Just I don't know if it's quarterback play or he didn't have the stats that a lot of people like. I always liked him. I think he's a mid-tier myself. 30 TDs, which is our high on this list.
Yeah, I think that TD, and I mean, we look at the touchdowns per game ratio. I think that puts him on par with Derek Mason.
Yeah, you know, you got a point there. You got a point there.
I mean, are they great? No, we don't have an actual great wide receiver in the group.
No. Not for their tenure with the team. Steve Smith was a legitimately great wide receiver.
Do we agree with Derek Mason at 1, though?
I would put Derek Mason at 1. I think Derek Mason was better than Torrey Smith. I almost called him Torrey Holt.
Well, that's a different.
He's no Torrey Holt.
And for me, the final spot comes down to Bolden or Steve Smith.
Yeah, that's where I'm at too. Smith has the better numbers overall, but I felt like Bolden was more impactful to their team during his time there, and I like Bolden better than Steve Smith. So I lean towards Bolden, but
I won't argue because I like Anquan Bolden also. So wide receiving group for the Baltimore Ravens: Derek Mason, Torrey Smith, Anquan Bolden. Is Steve Smith going over?
We can put Steve Smith over. I think his stats for this team represent a possibility for the alternate offense.
Next up, we have the tight ends, where we are looking at the guy who mastered the gaping shocker.
I saw that full of like, what the fuck is this?
We have Todd Wheat, Dennis Schwarma, and Shannon Sharp.
Their best skill position group of this team outside, not including Lamar Jackson at quarterback, I guess, but like overall, like
it's
not saying a lot.
Not a bad group. It's a pretty decent group.
It's a solid group. We have 4 players to choose from, which is not always the case with the tight end position, as we'll find out later. Mark Andrews, let's start with him. Just an absolute beast of a tight end in today's game. And very, as you said, very good at the shocker. I have him already as a top tier in this team.
Next name is going to be a top tier also. Is he as good as Mark Andrews? I don't think he is, but he is more than competent. I think he's still one of the better tight ends from his time from 2001 to 2010. But that tenure, Mark Andrews is nowhere near it yet. So we have another top tier, and we're going to have a decision to make.
We will. Dennis Pitta is not a top tier, but a solid tight end in his own right while he played. I think he struggled through injuries for a lot of his career. As you see, he played 7 years, but averaged less than 10 games per year. I think a couple of those were lost anyway, just completely lost. But when he played, he was not a bad tight end, had 13 TDs. He's a bottom tier, but was a solid tight end.
Yeah, agreed there. Shannon Sharp. If we were talking Shannon Sharp from another team, he's top tier. Only 2 years here in Baltimore, but it was a hell of a 2 years, and it's Shannon Sharp, mid-tier.
Yep. And he helped win the Super Bowl there. It's weird. We look at this offense. I know this team is young, but this offense is so bad, and yet they won 2 Super Bowls. And they're consistently good every year. All right. So, as you mentioned, we have a decision to make between Mark Andrews and Todd Heap.
When it comes down to these, we don't know how long Mark Andrews is there. So unless there's something on the horizon where we're thinking Mark Andrews isn't going to be there anymore, I almost assume he's going to be there as long. That's right. Kind of the mindset I go in with. And he's the better tight end. Yeah. So that's where I'm leaning.
That's kind of where I was going as well. Todd Heap was really good, but Mark Andrews is he's a modern tight end now. Todd Heap was more the old school era to some extent. Mark Andrews is so modern in his tight end, and he can block. And yeah, I'm with you. Mark Andrews top.
Okay. But Todd Heap is definitely going over to the Alt-O, which is where we are at. The alternate O, where we're looking at Ben Grubbs. Mike, proud to be a big boy Flynn. Jacoby Jones, Jermaine Lewis, Hall of Famer Jonathan Ogden, Marshall Yonda, and of course, Joe Flacco, Steve Smith, and Todd Heap that came over.
All right. We'll start with Ben Grubbs. 5 seasons of Pro Bowl, 74 games played. Solid offensive lineman, but he's a bottom tier.
Okay. And I think he was a step above Mike Flynn, which then would leave Flynn as a bottom tier.
Okay. Jacoby Jones is an interesting one here. Only played 3 seasons in Baltimore. Was part of that infamous play that picture shows where Mike Tomlin accidentally was on the field during a kick return.
With his leg extended in front of him.
Yeah. Oops. He did get suspended for that, by the way. Unbelievable. He did get fined like 100,000, but whatever.
Well, but if not for that, we're changing that 4 to a 5, though.
Yeah, we are. And by the way, by rule, that should have been counted as a touchdown, and it wasn't because he got tackled. He got tackled on the play. Anyway, but Jacoby Jones, only 3 years. But man, was he just an absolute game changer on the kickoff returns. 30.1 average kickoff returns. Still, when kick returns were still kind of a thing. We hadn't gone to the more modern where everything's a touchback. 4 touchdowns. Solid on punt returns, not as good. His tenure wasn't great. I lean towards top. I lean towards high end mid tier.
Mid tier. Okay. Then we have Jermaine Lewis, who almost just flipped the script here. What we talked about with Jacoby Jones, what Jacoby did on the kick returns, Jermaine Lewis did on the punt returns. That's 6 punt returns for a touchdown, 0 on the kick return, but he had an okay average on the kick.
It's a solid number.
It's a fairly average number. It's not below average is what I'm getting at, but the 6 touchdowns on the punt return to go along with 2 Pro Bowls and an all-team for his punt returns. And he's got the longer tenure, twice as long as Jacoby Jones, which is why I'm going to go top tier.
Yeah, I remember Jermaine Lewis playing, which I can't believe he didn't have a tough. I swear there was a game where he had against maybe it was somebody else, but I thought he had a game against the Vikings where the Vikings ran a kickoff touchdown. He ran one for Baltimore, and then the Vikings did it again. But I might have been a punt return for him. I don't remember, but that picture is of him returning a kick return for touchdown, but in the playoffs. These stats are for regular season, but just kind of irony. But he did have one. Which, by the way, the offense sucked in that game, but they still won like 37-7 because the Giants were. Oh boy, that Super Bowl sucked. Yeah, top tier for Jermaine. Jonathan Ogden, Hall of Famer, just an absolute wall on that left side for some really shitty quarterbacks. He's a top tier guy, just one of the all-time great left tackles.
Yeah, Yanda is behind Jonathan Ogden. However, he's still a top tier guy. That's 8 Pro Bowls and 2 all-time or all-team. Just another top tier.
He will likely be in the Hall of Fame, maybe not first ballot, but when his time comes, he will definitely make the Hall.
Are you going to change the rankings of either Flacco or Steve Smith? I'd like to keep Todd at a top.
I think Todd the top, and I'm going back and forth on Flacco a bit because his stats aren't bad. He won them a Super Bowl. He was
let's put him at top here because I do think we're going to have a decision here to make because I think we would agree on the top 2 that we're going to be going with.
Probably. I assume number 1 is Jonathan Ogden.
I'm on the offensive line for both of them.
Oh, for both of them? Okay. Yeah, that was kind of where I was leaning, but I wasn't sure where you would go with Jermaine Lewis because he's on that list as well.
Jermaine Lewis is on here?
Yeah, I think Jermaine Lewis, he was so electric. Yeah, he deserves to be on there. And he played some offense too, but just not a lot.
Okay, now we're down to Flacco or Heap. And the biggest knock here against Heap. Again, we were talking about his long tenure. Joe Flacco's longer.
Joe Flacco is 1 year longer, yes. But he also played quarterback.
30 games.
And 30 games longer, yes.
That's 2 seasons.
Well, I'm going by off the years. Then there's
Yeah.
injuries involved with Top Heat. Although Flacco also didn't play the final 6 games of his Baltimore career because Lamar Jackson did. If it's down to unless it's a sizable gap, I'm probably going to lean towards quarterback.
Yeah, I think the only thing that would have flipped that for me is if Flacco's touchdown to interception ratio was a little bit closer, but I think he got a fairly decent gap there in between.
He does.
So our 4 on the Alt-O are Jonathan Ogden, Marshall Yanda, Jermaine Lewis, and Joe Flacco.
Now what?
Oh, I was just going to say over on the defensive line.
Oh, I was just going to say, now we go over to the side of the ball where Baltimore's much more known, much more famous, much better at overall since their tenure. The defense and the defensive line.
We're looking at Rob Burnett, Declan Patrick Doomerville, Matt Judon, Kelly Gregg, Michael McCrary, Haloti Nata, and Trevor Price.
I would take every one of these on my team. I legitimately think all 7 of these players are good players. Now, we're not talking necessarily all timers, although I think we have a couple. But I mean, I would take every one of these on my team.
Yeah, they're all good, but we need to distinguish. And I think there's going to be a fairly clear line between our top and our bottom.
First up is Rob Burnett. Started the Baltimore era. He started with the Baltimore era. 82 games, 26 and a half sacks, 6 forced fumbles, was a really solid presence. A bit lacking on the sack side for what I see in the defensive line. And not a huge name for me. I do know the name. I don't have him higher than about bottom tier.
You don't have him higher than a bottom tier?
Not with what's coming. If you have him higher, then I would probably put him on the mid tier, but
I'd probably like him more on the mid tier. I still don't think either way. I don't think he's going to end up making this team.
No.
Elvis Doomerville. I know you were expecting the Elvis Presley route. I went Elvis Costello.
I was wondering who you went with.
2 Pro Bowls and an all-team with more sacks, more forced fumbles in fewer games. I think I probably have him fairly even with Rob because Rob was more of a destructive force on the inside and not letting the halfbacks through, where Elvis was a pure pass rusher, but I don't think is dominant of one to get him a tier above Rob. So I'm at a mid tier.
Yes, yeah, that's where I'm at as well. He played often alongside Matt Terrell Suggs as well, so he didn't get those doubles. Matt Judon, another guy. This is kind of a theme with Ravens. Play for a few years and you're gone. 5 years in Baltimore, 34 and a half sacks, kind of the same vein, almost identical, but with more games than Elvis Doomerville. And he went to New England in 2021 and played actually pretty well. I have him in that same mid-tier category because I think I put Elvis slightly higher than him.
Yeah, I think I'm a little ahead on Rob than I am on Matt. I don't know. They're all so damn close.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why I kind of wanted to go mid-tier because I don't think we have anybody that separates yet. No, so otherwise we'd have all bottom tier and then a couple top tier.
Yeah, that's fair.
Kelly Gregg, talking about tackling machine. Are you kidding?
Dude, we're
Dude.
missing a huge name.
What name?
Tony Saragusa.
Yeah, I don't know what it is about him. I know he's a name that, and man, everybody thinks of right away. Goose over there in fucking Baltimore.
Right.
I don't know what it is about him that I didn't like, but I'm looking at it going, nah.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Like I like this whole time I've been looking at this list outside of the one name which I knew. I'm like, man, I feel like there's a big name missing, and why can I not? I assumed it was on the offensive side of the ball with how kind of shitty that side is, but
no. Goose I looked at, and I put him on there. I took him off. I went back. I put him on again. I took him off. I went back there. I took him off again, and then I'm just like, yeah, fuck him.
Fair. I always thought.
There were also names on here that I added later because they're not in fucking alphabetical order either.
I've noticed that a couple of times, but I just assumed they were whatever.
Yeah, because I was back and forth with a few players, and I don't know why I had Nada originally over in the Alt O spot. I don't know if I just thought I switched tabs and I didn't, or
probably.
He almost made the alternate O.
Oh well, I think he scored a couple touchdowns in his career. Anyway, back to Kelly. Restart on Kelly Greg. I apologize for that. I realized I'm like, oh shit, that's like a huge name in Baltimore Legends.
Yeah, fuck Goose.
Fair.
Kelly Gregg, just a tackling machine. 370 tackles in 134 games. 19 and a half sacks, a couple forced fumbles. He might be a little bit higher up on the mid-tier for what we have.
Yeah, some people might look at that and be like, 370 is not that much, but when you consider he was an interior defensive lineman, that's a big total.
Yeah.
I think we have our first top tier here. Michael McCrary, just an absolute force for the early Ravens teams on that 2000 team, especially. Gets a bit overlooked from the 2000 team, but man, he was fucking good.
Yes.
Outside of his jazz hands there, apparently he's number 13th all time on this person's list, so he's a top tier for me.
Yeah, I agreed with that. And we're going to follow that up with another top tier, our alternate O, Haloti Ngata. 285 tackles in 135 games, 25 and a half sacks, 6 forced fumbles, just a wrecking ball. Top tier.
Yep. And and stuff that's not on the list, which those stats are really good for a defensive tackle. You can't quantify run stops like that, and you couldn't run on him. He just took up so much fucking space.
Not just run on him. This is a tackle that you had to double team.
Yeah.
He created more openings for your ends.
And finally, one of those ends who got the luxury of those openings is Trevor Price. Trevor Price playing this is towards the end of his career. I remember him, I think so, unless I have two different guys in mind. 56 games in Baltimore. Everything's on the low end on that, but he had 82 tackles, 26 sacks, 3 forced fumbles. I put him behind the other 4 mid-tier guys personally, and so for that, I think we can just keep him on the bottom.
Yeah, that's where I was at as well. Completely agreed with you. So we have our 2 that are making it. Which order do you have them in?
Now the McCrary.
Okay.
Now, I was a fan of Michael McCrary. Well, as much of a fan as I could be of a Ravens team, but I think Haloti Ngata was just such a difference maker at times. Not that Michael McCrary was, but
I thought you were going to argue the other way, and I was prepared to fight for Haloti.
Mm-hmm.
So
plus Haloti's tenure was a lot longer.
Which names are we going to take over to the Alt D?
I think we take Kelly Gregg over.
Yeah, he was the the leader of that group, I think, for both of us.
Mhm. I think you lean towards Rob over Elvis and Matt.
Yeah, I think my next name is Rob Burnett.
Okay, so, and mine was Elvis. So if we want to put both of them over in case we have a decision to make, I don't know if we're going to get to that point though, but we will. Just in case we do, I think having both of them isn't bad. I want to go.
Elvis.
Yeah, I want to go through that debate right now because it may be
because we might not need it.
Yep. Which also means that our defensive line is Haloti Nada and Michael McCrary. It's a pretty damn stout defensive line right there.
It is. Then as we go over to the linebackers, we are looking at Peter Tupperware, JJ, CJ, Michael Scott, Daryl Smith, the Batman villain himself, Terrell Suggs, and Adalius Thomas.
Your disrespect of the Ravens is great. You can tell you used to be a Cleveland fan. All right, we'll start with Peter Boulware, who I thought was the better linebacker of the 2000 Ravens defense team, quite frankly, not the other guy who's not on this list, but whatever. Peter Boulware, he was just an absolutely beast of a linebacker, 70 sacks, plus he had 14 forced fumbles. He is a top tier guy.
Absolutely. Jarrett Johnson, another tackling machine. Yeah, more than his fair share of sacks with 29 forced fumbles, had 3 interceptions, but he's a step behind Peter Boulware there, mid-tier.
Yeah. CJ Mosley, one of the more, probably one of 2 linebackers on this list that are more traditional in their linebacking units. Played for 5 years, but was really good. Turned into a big contract with the Jets. 9 interceptions in those 5 years. I have him at a mid-tier.
I have him between Jarrett Johnson and Peter Boulware.
Okay.
So I don't know where that, if that's still mid-tier for me, but he's behind Boulware. So Bart Scott.
Legendary shit talker.
Yeah, he's still behind CJ Mosley for me. But I still do. I don't like him.
Oh, I don't like him. I like it.
But as a linebacker, I can have a certain amount of respect for him. So I'm still going to go mid-tier on him.
Okay.
But not. Again, normally I'm like, he's somebody I like, but that's not the case here. It's not I don't like him, but I respect him.
Yep. Next up, Jacksonville Jaguar legend Daryl Smith. I loved his game in Jacksonville. Spent 3 seasons tackling the machine in Baltimore. 196 tackles in 48 games, 7 forced fumbles, 5 picks. I loved him in Jacksonville. I thought he was one of our better linebackers we've ever had. His tenure isn't great in Baltimore, and I have him behind the other 3, quite frankly. And
do you?
I do.
See, I have him in front of the other 3, still behind Boulware, but I have him in front of the other 3.
Interesting. Okay, so let's put him at mid-tier for now, then, because we'll have a decision to make.
Yeah, because again, I mean, I think for his time that he was there, he made a bigger difference.
He was fucking good. Again, I loved him in Jacksonville, man. I was sad to see him go.
Terrell Suggs is the best linebacker in Ravens history. Just a beast.
Yep. Another guy I can't stand personally, but I gotta respect his game. Just an absolute. This man came back from Achilles injury in the same season.
Yeah. So I mean, and talking the other guys like tackling machines, 606. That's 3 times the other tackling machines.
Yeah, he did everything.
Man, just insane.
And 7 picks.
Yeah,
he did everything. He was a nightmare in the back, on the front end of the big defense. And finally, Adalius Thomas played a lot longer than I realized in Baltimore. But part of that was because I thought he went from New England to Baltimore. He went the other way. He went from Baltimore to New England. Was really good in the Baltimore days. 96 games, 303 tackles, 38.5 sacks. Again, doesn't fill the stat sheet quite like some of the other guys on there, but still is damn good. I think he's in the mid-tier category as well. Well, this is the problem.
Well, do you agree Terrell Suggs is one?
Oh, yeah. I like Peter Boulware, but I can't argue that.
Peter Boulware, too. Yeah, and then the rest of our names are all mid-tier. I have it narrowed down to 2. If you can give me a couple names, we can see where we match, where we don't match, and then we can kind of go from there.
I'm probably at Adelius and CJ right now, off the top of my head, with Jared Johnson on my 3rd spot. I have Barton Darrell behind those 3.
Well, I was at Adelius Thomas and Daryl Smith. So that puts Adelius Thomas on, which then means we can take over for future discussion, if need be, CJ Mosley and Daryl Smith. So who are our names over on linebacker?
On linebacker, we ended up with Terrell Suggs, Peter Boulware, and age of Adelius Thomas.
And for defensive backs, we're looking at Marlon Humphrey, Chris McAllister, Ed Reed, Hall of Famer Deion Sanders, jazz pianist legend Jimmy Smith, Dwayne Starks, Ladarius Webb, Eric Weddle, and Hall of Famer Rod Woodson.
Starting with a modern player here with Marlon Humphrey.
Is he still with them, or did he leave?
Oh, he's still there. He got injured this year, and so he didn't play a lot in this year. But when he
normally I leave it open, so I was curious on why I put a closing.
Yeah, I thought you did that. I actually thought you did that.
And then even if I did do that, like we're still in the 21 season.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Marlon Humphrey, just a shutdown corner in the league right now. Did suffer some injuries this year, unfortunately. I like him. I know his interception totals ain't high, but a lot of that's because people just don't throw at him. His tenure isn't long because he's only had 73 games since 2017, but 12 forced fumbles from the back end is a lot. I have him as a top tier.
He's a top tier? Okay. I'm a little surprised by that, but
I think he's really fucking good. He's top 5 in the league right now.
See, I probably don't quite have him there without having names in front of me. He's not somebody that I think of as a top 5 current. Chris McAllister, there forever and a day, 135 games, 388 tackles. So his tackles per game isn't as high as Marlon Humphrey is. Of course, his forced fumbles are going to be behind by quite a bit, but his interceptions are quite a bit higher. He's a top tier for me.
Yep. I like you have his name spelled wrong, and it makes me laugh every time I look at it. McAllister was it the McMaster? McAllister. I don't know. I saw that. I was gonna change it. Like, no, I love that too fucking
much. And I've been saying it right.
You have, yeah, you did. You said it right.
Chris McMallister. I don't know how that happened.
All right. Our next name on the list is why I kind of want to go back and change them. The other two, the mid tiers, to be frank,
because there's a gap, man.
Oh yeah, Ed Reed. We talked about him, right? Face of the franchise, just 61 picks in a more modern game, which you just don't have interceptions like that. Absolutely incredible career.
Deion Sanders only there for 2 years. So I can't go top tier, but I'm not going to disrespect prime time, mid tier.
No. What is that number though? What is that number? I know he played with Chris McAllister, but I guarantee Chris McAllister would gave up 21 for him. It was his age when he played the first season. That's why he wore 37 for the record. But come on. They should drop him a tier just for that bullshit. That's not Deion Sanders' number. That's nighttime Deion Sanders there. The pianist himself, Jimmy Smith, also a present current player. You have the 2021 thing on there again.
I have that on there for him as well.
A very good corner for many years. I've never thought him as a great corner though. Solid corner, really good at times. I don't have him. I don't have him very high at all. If you can convince me on mid tier, fine. I was gonna say, but bottom tier is where I'm at with him.
He's a bottom tier, but again, he's got a long tenure and counting. He's more than serviceable.
Yeah.
He's
a starter. He's a starter.
He's better than a plug and play player.
Yeah. I mean, he's a starter in the well, he was for most of his career. He probably wasn't this year, but yeah, you just got forced into a role that he wasn't able to do. But
Dwayne Starks, I'm struggling with Dwayne Starks a little bit because if we were talking about him before Ed Reed, he's probably top tier. But now we're talking about him after Ed Reed, so he's mid tier. But I do like Starks, probably not as much as McAllister, but I like him better than Marlon Humphrey.
Mm-hmm. You want to switch those two to mid tiers then?
Yeah.
Switch Marlon and Chris to mid tier. But if you want to put Dwayne at mid, go ahead. I probably have him behind slightly than the other two, but his interception to gains ratio is really, really good.
Yeah.
Ladarius Webb next up, tackling machine from the secondary, 400 tackles and only 127 games a lot, but still. Another good he's in the Jimmy Smith, a little bit better than Jimmy Smith to me, but it was still in that same mold. I don't pull him above a bottom tier, but I think he's a really good corner during his time.
Agreed. Eric Weddle. Huge fan of Eric Weddle, which is weird because it took me a little while to warm up to him in San Diego.
It did.
Like I wasn't a big fan of him right away. It did take me a while to warm up to him.
Look at that beard.
Yeah.
He's got Joe Thornton, Brett Bird's beard there.
Yeah. And again, he's a difference maker when he was on the field. He's another mid tier.
And finally, we end with Rod Woodson. Played his remaining years here in Baltimore, 20 interceptions in 64 games, Super Bowl championship, his only Super Bowl championship. His games ain't there, his interceptions ain't there. I don't care. He's a top tier.
Yeah. When we're talking Ed Reed being like one of the possible best safeties, the one that pops up that might be better is Rod Woodson. His tenure in Baltimore is not better, so I'm keeping Ed Reed.
Yeah,
one.
Yeah, Ed Reed's an easy number one. Yeah, for tenure wise. And by the way, Rod Woodson's another one of those guys that played both corner and safety. He played safety in his back half of his career damn well, but he started as a corner with Pittsburgh and was damn good and was a touchdown machine in his entire career.
Well, you get a little older, you slow down a little bit, and you move back to safety.
Yep. All right, but we got 2 spots left and a shit ton of dudes. We have 5 dudes for 2 spots. I'm going to get out of the way now. I'm just going to say it. I'm sorry. Deion Sanders does not make another team.
He doesn't actually. When you were saying that, I wasn't even looking over in his direction. Like there were 4 guys that I'm looking between, trying to figure out which ones I want to get rid of because Deion was already eliminated.
No, yes.
He does not have the tenure in Baltimore.
Yeah, and he came back after
stats while he was in Baltimore. He had already retired and
for
then
multiple years.
Yeah, was sitting around the house, got bored, and said, "I'm going to come back and play some football."
He was actually on the NFL Today show for those years he was retired on CBS. I'm going to be frank, and I think I'm putting McAllister at 3.
That's who I was looking at for 3, and then I have a name that I'm looking at for 4.
My initial thought was Marlon Humphrey. I really do like him. I think he's a top end corner. Eric Weddle was really good, even though his time was short in those 3 seasons, 3 Pro Bowl nods, which is more than Marlon Humphrey has, and more interceptions than Marlon Humphrey has. And then that's leaving out Dwayne Starks, who has the most interceptions, all 3 of them. I don't know. I'm struggling.
Well, you were at Marlon Humphrey next.
Yeah, initially, yes.
Third. He's third on mine. I like Starks better than I like Marlon Humphrey. I like Eric Weddle more than I like Dwayne Starks.
Okay.
So I'm at Weddle 1 and Marlon Humphrey 3rd.
Weddle was probably my 2. So that would probably mean that Weddle would be our 4th overall.
Okay. Which then would mean that Dwayne Starks is not going to get consideration, but Marlon Humphrey will. And who'd we end up with at defensive back?
On defensive back, we have Ed Reed, Rod Woodson, Chris McAllister, and Eric Weddle.
My biggest hope is that we get comments from people that are upset because of the mispronunciation of names. Mm-hmm. The ones that we're doing on purpose, completely ignoring the ones that we actually fuck up.
Yeah. Oh, that would be fucking fantastic.
Okay, and over on our Alt D, we have all familiar names, no new names here. Kelly Gregg, Rob Burnett, Elvis Dumerville, CJ Mosley, Daryl Smith, Marlon Humphrey. I think I have one name that stands out above the others for me.
Kelly Gregg?
Yes, Greg Kelly.
That was kind of the one I initially had thought, because he was bordering on the top tier in the defensive line spot. So yeah. Now we have 5 choices for our last spot. And, usually when we get to Alt D, it's not difficult. We usually have like 2 or 3 guys to choose from.
Yeah, but the problem here is we were split at linebacker.
Yep.
Or I'm sorry, we were split at linebacker. We were split on the defensive line, and we were split on the cornerback.
Mm-hmm.
So Kelly Gregg was the only one that we agreed on.
Yep. And now
So I'm looking at it. I would take my defensive lineman over my linebacker.
So
I'd take Rob Burnett over Daryl Smith.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree with that, yes. Because Daryl Smith would be my 5th in this choice.
Okay, now between your defensive lineman and your linebacker, who will you take?
Dumerville and Mosley?
Mm-hmm.
Dumerville.
Okay, so we're both at defensive line. And again, I'm not nearly as high on Humphrey as you are.
Mm-hmm.
Which leads me again to Rob Burnett over Marlon Humphrey. But would you take Marlon Humphrey or Elvis Dumerville?
I would probably take Marlon Humphrey.
Then he's the one that makes this team.
Okay. So our Alt D is Kelly Gregg and Marlon Humphrey. Well, that went well. Let's talk our overall lineup. We'll start with the offensive side of the ball, and we have a really good quarterback in Lamar Jackson. That's about as much as I could say positive here. We got running backs Jamal Lewis and Ray Rice. Receiving core Derek Mason, Torrey Smith, and Anquan Bolden with a solid, good tight end in Mark Andrews. We do have Jonathan Ogden and Marshall Yanda on our line, with Joe Flacco backing up Lamar Jackson and Jermaine Lewis turning the game around with punt returns.
Which you're going to need a lot of them for this team. Defense.
You're on the defensive side.
Looking a little bit better than the offense.
Yeah. This is where Baltimore tends to shine a bit more. We have Haloti Ngata and Michael McCrary as our starting defensive line, and joining them in our 3-4 defense is Kelly Gregg, our 3-3-5 defense, our nickel defense. At linebacker, we have Terrell Suggs, Peter Bulware, and Adalius Thomas. So we still have fucking pass rushers back there. And our secondary is Ed Reed, Eric Weddle at safety, Rod Woodson, Chris McAllister as well, along with Marlon Humphrey. This defense saves them from being in the running, obviously, for the very bottom spot.
Yes, I still think the offense is bad enough to where they're going to be a below average team to maybe a bad team.
Yeah, they're not getting above average below average for sure. It will be curious when we do this how much stock we put into this defense versus the offense. And where we're at with teams right now. I could see them being in the bad category for sure. But I think maybe they'll slip into the below average and stay there.
With just the offense, they're going to be bad and in the discussion for worse. I don't think they're going to get it, but they're going to be in the discussion.
I think they got enough pieces in the offense to keep them out of the bottom spot. Yes.
Like Jonathan Ogden is a huge one.
Huge one.
Antoine Bolton has a big name recognition to him. Yeah. On the defensive side, I don't know if I'm going to be talking about them in terms of like the best, but I do think that they're going to be an above average, quite possibly a good.
Yeah, I think they're going to be running that line. I feel like maybe they'll be pushed. My thought is they might end up pushed back a little bit further into the above average than we're thinking, but I would not be surprised if they end up in the good spot.
But the fact that this team has been around for such a short amount of time, and we can say that is,
yeah, I mean, they're at least on defense, their ability to produce legendary and great defenses is incredible. Outside maybe the last couple of years, their defense has finally settled down and is actually borderline bad now. It is and you know, basically since they became a thing, their defense has just been outstanding. Yeah. All right, but that has been. We're done with Baltimore.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us for this video. Make sure you let us know what we got right, what we got wrong down in the comments. Again, until next time, deuces.